Welcome to You Can Cook Anything with Bob and JP. I'm JP, and this week I discovered that I have a sourdough starter in the back of my fridge that hasn't been fed for 24 weeks. That's quite a while. That's about half a year. So what I wanted to find out, and I thought you might be interested in seeing this too, is how I could try to revive this sourdough starter and to see if I could be successful reviving this sourdough starter so that I can use it in a future recipe and a future video. So come along with me while we see if we can revive Rip Van sourdough starter. So I'm wondering, how long can I keep a sourdough starter in the fridge if it's sealed in one of these jars? And I guess we're going to find out if it's survived its time in my fridge, because I'm going to open this up and feed it and see what happens. So I thought I'd share that with you. So let's open it first. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Okay, it's got a little hooch on top, and it looks like it's not, this sourdough starter on the sides hasn't really dried out that much, probably because it was so sealed. So I'm going to stir in the hooch there just to get it to an even consistency. Okay, so I'm going to use this takeout container, which is clean, to hold my starter while I'm reviving it, and it'll give me a chance to clean my usual container. I think what I'll do is do the same amount of starter as water and flour. So 100% starter, 100% water, 100% flour. So equal amounts of everything. So let's go for 100 grams. Just keep it simple. That's going to be most of this starter. For this first feeding, I'm going about 100 for each. 100 grams of water. This is water that I use to feed my starter. I have boiled the chlorine out. There we go. Now I'll stir that. It's always good to add the water first because it's easy to stir. Of course, this starter just is not thick at all. This is going to be interesting. This is now quite big in this container. I might need to transfer it to a taller container. Let's do that. Since we're trying to baby this, let's give it some room. Okay. Give it a tall container. And we want 100 grams of flour. This flour is actually a mix of rye and wheat that I like to use to feed my starter. I think the rye really encourages some more complex flavors in the starter. And I started this starter with rye flour, so it likes to eat rye. So I'm hoping that helps make it happy and keep it happy. Okay. So we got 100% hydration here. We're going to check on it in 6 hours. Mix that in. Get nice and thoroughly moistened. All right, well that's good and mixed. Everything's moistened. Okay. One more thing that I'm going to do. I want to know if this is active. So I'm going to take a rubber band and place it on my container. You can see. And I'm going to adjust it to the height, the current height of my sourdough starter. This is why it pays to scrape off the sides. So I like to use a chopstick to mix my starter, and so when I mix, I often scrape the sides so that they're clear. It makes it easier to see if the starter is growing. Okay, so the rubber band will mark that location, and we're going to check in with this in 6 hours and see how it's doing. 6 hours passed, and I checked on the sourdough, and the level had not risen at all above the band, above the rubber band. So I gave it another 6 hours. So here we are at 12 hours from when we first fed this basically dormant sourdough starter. And you can see it's almost doubled in size, which is exactly what we want to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a second feeding, and this time I'm going to keep, I think, 50 grams and then feed it with 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour mixture, and we'll see what that looks like. Look, you can see from the rising there are lots of bubbles in there. Save the rest of that starter for something else. It's a little hard to see through the container, but that's about the level of the sourdough starter right now. We're going to give this about 6 hours and then come back and see how it's doing. So now in 6 hours, this is already doubled, which means it's more active than it was before by quite a lot. I actually don't have time to feed it right now, so I'm going to let it go for a little while longer, and when it starts to collapse, then I will feed it. And I think we can declare this thing still alive. Okay, here we are, 11 hours after I fed this thing the second time. I did not feed it a third time. I wanted to see how much it would continue to expand, and you can see it's several times, it's puffed up several times over its original volume. And if I can see, I can show you inside. I don't know if you can see how it's kind of crowned. You know, it's domed, I guess I should say. In the middle, it's higher than it is on the outside, which tells me it's still expanding, actually. So this is pretty active. It had enough food, you know, as it consumed the nutrients in the flours, but this means that the yeast has continued to multiply and grow, and so it's very active at this point. So now is the point where I'm going to actually feed this thing, and I'll check it again. So right now it actually is 5 o'clock, so I am going to give it a third feeding and then see what it looks like in 6 hours, see if it doubles in 6 hours. That will be 10 p.m. tonight, and we'll get a view of how it's doing then. I fed the starter and then let it sit on the counter for about 5 hours, and this is what happened. It had expanded to a few times its size, showing that it is quite active and ready to bake with. So I took the starter at this point and I put it in the refrigerator. I will give it another feeding just before I'm ready to use it, and I will bake some bread. I feel like I was lucky that this starter wasn't moldy or anything, but I think this shows that you can neglect your starter for a pretty long time in your refrigerator without feeding it, and it will be fairly easy to revive back to the activity level that you want to see before you can bake. And in case you haven't seen it before, I wanted to show you what it looks like once the starter has expanded to the point beyond its maximum activity and starts to collapse down. This is what it looks like. You'll notice on the sides of the container there are streaks where the starter expanded and then collapsed back down, leaving that residue on the side. Well, I hope you found this video interesting. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to see me use this starter in a recipe. Remember what Bob and I always say, you can cook anything.